to another Linux Gamecast. No, this is not Linux Gamecast Weekly. In fact, we're going to do something just a bit different. This is part of our developer interview series. Here's the idea. We're going to track down someone, stalk them really, con them in to coming on the show. Then we're going to screech over to our favorite subreddit, Linux_gaming, make a post, top 5 questions. They're going to read them and get back with the answers. That's fantastic. This guy, this test subject, if you will, who was brave enough to be on our first episode, you might know him from such ports as Wire Vessel, Super Hexagon, and the upcoming Proteus. It is Mr. Flibitijibibo. How's it going, man?
Not bad. Kind of excited to do this because I haven't really done a interview type thing for a while. And this sounded like a lot of fun.
Well, it's hopefully going to be a lot of fun. And over here is Linux_gaming. We posted this earlier this morning, a few hours back, about 9 hours ago. Everyone got into it. We got 24 comments. Out of those 24, we're going to pick the top 5. And you, sir, are going to answer them. But before we get into that, man, how the hell did you get into Linux development in games? Did you just fall into it? Seriously?
It was kind of an accident. Most of my career came about from accidents. Like Linux, I've only been using it since about fall of 2010, and that was only because I was in college at the time. Obviously not doing a lot because it's college. And on my laptop, I decided I would just install Fedora after some Humble games came out and be like, oh, I'll try some of these. And it turns out I started using it full time about 6 months later. And then a year after that, I was looking at some other projects that I could do during the summer because I didn't want to get a real job. And it turns out the Waveform developer, Eathan Industries, had an audio programming job available. And since audio is my specialty, really, that's what I do. I asked him if he wanted me to do it and whatever it was he wanted me to do, and he said yeah, but the game was only on Windows at the time. Problem is, I don't really like developing on Windows that much. One thing I liked about Linux so quickly was that developing, even just like building and editing and compiling stuff and making project files is so much easier on Linux, at least for me. So for me, it was mostly the Linux port stuff came about only because I wanted to make a game, but it wasn't on Linux, so I guess I'll just port it first and then we'll see what happens. But by the time I finished porting Waveform, I was working on Blueberry Garden version, and Humble had found me, so I ended up just doing that instead.
So Humble came knocking at your door. What do you mean when you said that audio is your specialty, man? That's kind of new.
Well, most of what I've been doing for the last... Because, I mean, if you look at the record, I've only been doing Linux ports for about a year now. Well, it'll be a year in April. But audio and music production is actually what I've been doing for about 10 years now. So none of it's ever been published. It's always been, like, independent stuff for recording for school concerts or something like that. It was never quite as extravagant as being able to do a Humble port. But, when it comes to audio, recording and broadcasting, and I was wanting to do some audio technologies, but, it turned out porting was way easier to find a job for rather than audio programmer. It's more prominent these days, but it wasn't when I was starting to look for actual work.
Right on. You said that the Humble bundle came knocking. How did they track you down, man?
They tracked me down after I complained about Limbo.
What?
If you must, like, cause you'll see records saying that I've openly been critical of things like that. And one thing I was kind of
was Limbo the one that was done with the wine? Yeah.
And I was like, what? Oh, I didn't know anything about Limbo at the time. So I was like, why? There are enough games to where that's not really an issue. What could have happened? So I somehow came into contact with Jeff Rosen, and he was able to talk to people. I guess he asked, and then it turns out it's because of Wise. And that's an audio middleware that it's probably my favorite middleware, but only on a technological level. Unfortunately, there's no Linux support, so you're kind of screwed if you're trying to get native support with Wise. So I guess at that point they settled with crossover. I don't know how good that crossover bottle is, I didn't really care much for it at that point. But when I was complaining about that and talking about the technical issues, he kind of went, "Do you port games?" Because I guess he found out that I was porting other games, and then the rest is history. But so basically, I found Humble via internet rage, essentially.
There was a lot of rage about that whole snafu, man. I remember that vividly, and I don't think we'll ever see another wine port.
I don't think so either.
No.
I mean, I think if the ports were good enough, because I mean, there's it'll be received negatively in the public, but I don't, it's sort of cheating. There you can cut corners in a lot of ways when it comes to game development, but that's probably not one of them. Especially for someone who's paying. Well, I mean, I don't know, because it's the policy for the Linux support is obviously come into question a lot lately with the THQ bundle and the other experimental bundles that have kind of leaned towards Windows only support and maybe Linux support if the Game Jam developers happen to get it via Java or something like that.
Right on.
So I mean, it's stuff like that for me, I'm the Linux porter. I make the Linux games. I don't, I can't control everybody, and I'm not a humble representative. I'm not a voter in that deal. So I don't know. I'd probably be the one that'd be kicking and screaming for that kind of thing because
no doubt.
Obviously that affects my business. But
So you just finished up, what was it, Super Hexagon? That really, man, I noped out of that game. Not to the quality of the game, but I don't like getting stabby around expensive equipment, and that made me stabby very quickly.
Everybody I know, it was so much fun seeing people play that game after a while, because I took the port out of the blue, because it was like, oh, it came from a weekend off. Like, I had finished Codename Lol No, which is my NDA project of right now. And Proteus was pretty much done. It was in QA, no activity. So I had a weekend off. I tried doing a vacation-y thing Friday and it failed. And then I noticed Terry was asking for Super Hexagon. He was talking about Super Hexagon Linux. So I went, hey, do you need me to do it? You're using open frameworks. I could probably port it in a weekend. And I did. But, and that went out a couple days after that because it went out with a libvorbis bug, which is really embarrassing, but I got it fixed the next day, luckily. But yeah, it was an impromptu port that I just did because I like the game, and apparently a lot of other people do too, because I've been seeing people get infuriated by how difficult it is.
Yes.
I can't even get past the third level.
Oh, that's just oof, stabby, man. I'm just going to put that memory somewhere else. But you mentioned Proteus. The hell's that?
Proteus has been very comfortable port, I will say, because they were using mono and they were using SDL, which basically means, honestly, the only thing you'll notice the first screenshot that I ever did of Proteus Linux, it's 2 hours.png, because that's actually how long it took for me to go from getting the source code to having it working in Linux. There wasn't any real platform-specific stuff other than XDG spec saves, and I pulled in my controller support that I recently did for Codename Lol No. I pulled that into Proteus so you can configure controllers properly, because that was something they were struggling with. So other than that, I put it through QA last weekend, and I got a lot of stuff fixed. And at this point, I'm basically just making sure that it's not broken in other tremendously horrible ways. So I'm hoping if there's no major updates that the Proteus team wants to do, then I'm probably going to ship it in the next couple weeks. It's in RC1.
So it's going to next few weeks. How's that? Is it going to be on Steam or?
No, it should be. I'm pretty quick about getting stuff up on Steam, because I know that issue with, that 0 byte download nonsense that can be really frustrating. So I'm like with Super Hexagon, when I got it done and I gave it to Terry, he and I both knew we need to get this up now. We can't have the 0 byte stuff happening. It took a while for that to happen because clearance is still a little bit fiddly, but I mean, I'm very very pedantic about that. Steam clearance issue, because it is an issue.
Right on. So, how about we jump into the questions? But before we do that, to scream at everyone in the chat room who's watching live, hello guys, how's it going? So, now we're up to speed and where we're at. So let's grill Mr. Lee for a moment. Well, you guys are doing it. I'm just going to read it in my angelic voice, and he'll answer. So, K900, could have been 9,000, but I'm guessing that was already taken. Ask, what's the future of gaming on Wayland? Will it be an easy transition once the basic libraries are ported, or will it require more effort? Now, Wayland is this mythical upcoming replacement for X, right?
Yes, it's supposed to be the successor to the very, very old X org. So, when it comes to gaming on Wayland, I don't really know. For me, it's not that big of a deal because I use SDL, and when it comes to the point where we use SDL2 I think has a Wayland backend. I know the Doom 3 devs using SDL2 for Wayland, and some other, like some other small projects are using it. I think I wouldn't be so worried about Wayland's things being built for Wayland as much as Wayland's X support. Because if Wayland's X support is bad, nobody's going to care. Because the old games, like my old SDL 1.2 games, I could, in theory, update all those to SDL2 for Wayland. But if there's enough going on with SDL to SDL2 that I'm going to have to charge for it, especially for these old games, it may not be worth that. So we'd rather have the X support in Wayland to be good. Because it'd be great to have Wayland be good and all by itself for the new games, but for the old games, that's a serious issue.
Didn't Fedora plan on shipping Wayland at some point?
Fedora and Canonical, and I'm sure everybody's probably got Wayland support somewhere, but it's mostly, right now it's mostly, well, it's experimental, etc., etc. We don't, I don't think anybody really knows
no one's
when that transition's going to happen.
Yeah, no doubt. So, hopefully that answered the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Pizza Dude, actually somebody who watches our show, glad you're also taking part of this. This is a question of the ages, which, we at Linux Gamecast never miss a chance to rip on it. It's a constant running joke in the show, but he asked, why is your name flibitijibibo?
I should probably start with the official pronunciation. The full pronunciation of my name is flibitijibibo. I usually just go with Flibbit because it's more informal anyway. But the actual reason that my name is flibitijibibo, what am I going to make up this time? I should have thought of that. I believe I was visiting a science museum for a class trip. As I was taking a photo, a radioactive spider came and bit me. And then
that sounds an awful like a movie I've seen. Are you sure, man?
I think it's Batman Begins.
I thought it was Back to the Future, but then again, brain fog.
Oh, yeah. It was. I've been told it's similar, but they mostly came from that incident. And then the next day, I just suddenly woke up and I was flibitijibibo. It was interesting. I mean,
you seem to be coping with it very well.
I couldn't even keep that up. There really isn't. They probably want to know a reason, and honestly, there isn't one. It's just a name that I just wanted a name that was. It's a name that's convenient. It may not be convenient to say, but it's sure convenient to use.
It's fantastically inconvenient to type out. Doing this lower third almost gave me an aneurysm because I couldn't copy and paste it in there. I had to type it out by hand.
My life goal is to make flibitijibibo a household word.
Is it going to be a verb or a noun?
Both.
Neat. So, Reddit the Threadit. I like that. That's clever. Ish. Hello, Eathan, as he says. I've been following your Twitter feed, and it's been interesting keeping up with your Linux ports. Congrats on your success. And I have a question for you. No, all right, well, let's do this thing. What do you feel is the most misunderstood part of porting Linux games? Thanks again, Eathan. Good luck to you and your jobs in porting many other games to Linux. So what he's asking is, hookers and blow, man? Is that a misconception? Or
Oh no, I don't think that part's not a misconception at all. It seems rather clear cut. But for the most misunderstood part of porting games, I think it's just the APIs. Like I posted about this on our games a couple of months ago. I don't even remember when it was, but all I remember is that I woke up the next day and it had like 500 zillion upvotes. So apparently it was well received. But it was basically people. Whenever you bring up Linux games or Mac games, it's always, it's got to be, well, it's DirectX and DirectX versus OpenGL and da 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 da. I don't really care because that's not true. It's true that the port from DirectX to OpenGL is a hurdle that you have to get over, but it's not it's not like some kind of mystical impossibility where DirectX is better than OpenGL or OpenGL is better than DirectX, because they basically do the same stuff. If you're a game developer trying to ship a stable product, you're not worrying about these tremendously bleeding edge features where it's like, well, this feature that was just added in GL4.3, DirectX doesn't have that at all, or I don't know if that's even true because I don't work with those things. We're still in that age, in that consoleized issue where it's all DirectX 9 or OpenGL 2.x. So I think when it comes to libraries on Linux, I would not be. The issue is not, DirectX blah 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 blah. It's more, it's this proprietary middleware that is obscure and doesn't even have Mac support. Like Wise for Limbo. It's like, if that probably could have been ported natively if Wise just had a native library. So it's mostly proprietary middlewares, not the Microsoft DirectX API, things like that. It's not APIs, it's just middlewares when it comes to unportability.
So, I think that's pretty cool. So that's our misunderstood magic bit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think you should write these as two separate. Well, too bad. Solix. Steam Runtime 1. Yay or nay? This is somebody you know, right, David?
Yeah, this is one of my guys who does QA for me with my humble games and my non-humble games. He's actually like a really smart developer. He should probably have my job, but he's giving me a chance. But but he's asking me basically about the Steam runtime. Basically, how people are adapting to it varies, because apparently Ryan Gordon, who's done stuff like Killing Floor, and I'm sure everybody knows who Ryan Gordon is, but he's apparently developing his Steam versions of games for the Steam runtime. Meanwhile, Edward is, I saw it for the cave. He has a function in his bash scripts where he's stripping out the Steam runtime from the library path. And between the two, I'm actually on the side of Edward's method, where for the PC Linux at least, I'm probably just going to ship my games exactly the same as I ship them in any other distribution channel. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's the PC. In the Steam runtime, if there's going to be a problem with it, so far there hasn't been, but if there's going to be, I'm probably going to do what Edward does and strip it from the path, because it's just supposed to be a distribution channel for Linux desktop. I don't need the runtime as what it's going to eventually be, which is probably the console runtime. And in that case, you're basically going to have to build for their console, which is basically their Steam runtime development environment, which I think you just build it in like a chroot environment, and then you build your game in that, and then that is basically linked against the runtime. But I'll do that for the console that they make. I won't do it for the desktop, because that's one extra step for what's essentially just a desktop game being distributed via Steam. I don't really care about your distribution platform. I just care that it distributes to the user, and then the user is just going to run it like any other game. So, yeah, if right now for the desktop, I'm kind of fighting against the runtime. I appreciate the sentiment of what they're trying to do. it's just not. It just seems like overkill. You don't need to ship a mini Linux distro in your digital distribution client. At least in my opinion. I'm sure like I'm gonna ship a game and then it's only gonna work the Steam runtime is gonna explode and it's like, okay, I'm gonna have to, return to that tail between my legs and fix it. But for now I'm just a grumpy person getting mad about Linux libraries.
Hey man, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's definitely always good to scream at stuff like that. But on the topic, kind of sidetrack, what do you think of the Steam box, man? All the screaming and whatnot going on about that. Is that something that, is it ever going to be a thing in your opinion, man?
Some people have asked about this, and I have my opinion of it is probably one that it's not even necessarily like controversial. It's mostly I I don't know. I'm pretty when you get bitter about the games industry and like how major console development works, you approach a level of bitterness to where you achieve a sort of enlightenment about how the technical aspect of console development works, according to businesses. So like if the Steam box takes off and a bazillion people buy it solely because it's Valve or whatever reason it ends up being, Activision, for instance, is not going to care that it's running Linux or is running like some Ubuntu variant, which I doubt they're probably going to build their own very compact distro that runs Steam on top of it. But they're probably not going to care all that much about what the box actually runs. They're just going to pull the chain that they're developers on, and they're going to say, hey, Valve made a thing that's a console. It apparently prints money. You're going to develop for it. I don't care how it works. You're just going to develop for it. And if it just so happens to us that, that it's a Linux game and therefore will run on Linux, that's a neat side effect. But, Bobby Kotick is not going to know. Well, he might know because he's actually pretty technologically sound. But the point is, businesses, the board meetings, they're not going to know, oh, the Steam box is running a Linux distro with Lib.C 215.
Right on.
It's going to be, it's a thing that Valve made. It prints money. Go make things for it.
No doubt. And kind of with the Steam box, did you hear them screeching about the PS4 is going to be x86 based, man?
Yeah, yeah. I assume it's x86 64 because I mean it's got 8 gigs of memory. But I think it's neat. I guess it'd be nicer to. I don't know what their development tools were like. You'd have to ask one of their licensees if they'll. Obviously, it's probably all under NDA, but I don't know. I guess it might be easier for people to move from between PC and console, but I mean, I don't know enough about it. I'm sure it's a positive thing.
I have this weird dream that it's actually going to be easy because it's like, it's Sony. The crew's probably going to run Linux. Then again, it's Sony. They're going to find some way to cock it up.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. They're probably. I don't know. They're probably not even going to give they're not going to give the option this time. I'm sure.
Do not tango with the type of people who will install Linux on a PlayStation. You will lose.
I know. That's like that just seemed very interesting because when they pulled it out, I was like, really? You're just going to remove the option? I don't know. That's really that's not disabling Linux installation. That's disabling easy mode.
Fair point, man. All right, back on topics. Here we go. What do you think? Well, this is from Hernbrot. I'm sure I'm butchering that. That's because I love you and you're arch user. Somebody from the show will get that. He asked, man, what do you think's the most lacking for games on Linux, i.e. is there a library or a framework missing that you'd love to see, or is it all just drivers, or is everything in place? I think that's,
For me, I got everything I need. For me, anyway. Like, I just use SDL, OpenAL, and a couple file loading things. Like, if I need STB image, STB Vorbis, or the actual Vorbis and image loaders. And I think when it comes to libraries we absolutely need, I think they were okay. I think there are places we can improve.
Like what?
Like when I was thinking about, when I was working on Vessel, I had fmod I had to work with Fmod, and why I don't really like Fmod. Like I have an admiration for Wise as a audio technology because it really is doing some interesting things with what it's doing. It just doesn't have a Linux version. But Fmod, I just don't like in any. I don't like the technology. I don't like it from an audio developer's perspective. I do like Firelight Tech because when I complained about Fmod for Vessel, so someone actually like came and said, you know, let us fix it. And so I sent them the game, and like the next day they gave me a fixed customized Fmod binary, which was awesome. I don't,
yeah.
but you know, I'd rather if there's Wise probably isn't going to make a Linux version. Fmod, I don't really like that much, even if they fix the platform support, which they obviously haven't. So I actually thought about developing an audio middleware with some of my free time, but right now I'm kind of still trying to figure out where to get free time, because any free time I have now is mostly trying to get commercial stuff done so I can, you know, pay rent, basically. Maybe if I'm one of those guys that just has is like constantly posting on Twitter, hey, I'm thinking about an audio middleware, or hey, I'm thinking about writing a resource for game devs thinking about Linux or wants to develop games using Linux. I just throw out stuff like that. All of them, most of it is like, hey, will I get some massive explosion of, oh, this is an amazing thing, you should do it? Because I mean, let's face it, most of those ideas, specifically the way I do them, would be the worst Kickstarters ever. Like, it'd be like, what do you put down for funds, and how like who's gonna put enough money to get that going via Kickstarters? And plus, I don't really like e-begging in that way, so I'm trying to find ways to where I can raise funds more directly rather than just doing contracts constantly. Because then, if I do it that way, then there's no way I'm gonna make enough to sit down and make a middleware or make a game dev resource.
Well, on that topic, man,
like
what
that.
do you think? Do you think you'll ever get snatched up? What's the market like for a Linux developer right now, as far as being in games? Are there anyone shopping around?
Or wait, what do you mean again?
Any big studios looking?
Oh,
no.
I probably not. Yeah, I mean, there are a couple devs that I would trust would make Linux games if they had, like, I'm sure if Valve starts shipping Steam boxes to developers, like, I assume Sega and Ubisoft would be the two publishers that I would suspect would be the first to support it and support it well. Because I think Ubisoft actually has internal Linux support for a couple of their games. I think Wargame European Escalation was based on the Arma engine, which apparently had Linux internal support, which they eventually released to the public. And then Sega, I mean, they have Spiral Knight, they have The Cave, and I think if any developer would want to do that, I'm sure Sega wouldn't object unless it was just, unless it was really cutting into their funds, which I don't think that Edward cost that much when they were getting The Cave on Linux. So, yeah, for AAA, I don't know that much, but most of my stuff is speculation. So
right.
Most of my work is with indies.
No doubt, man. So how many questions have we blown through? Anyone been keeping track? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are there any bonus ones in here that you want to screech back at?
Let's see. There's next question. There was... Should be... Actually, this one I like. This is one by DNW Official. Who... let's see, it was, hi, Flibbit. First of all, I would like to say that you are my favorite reporter. Do you think that we, the GNU Linux community, should be helping you? And by that, I guess he means, do you think it's useful if we suggest you to developers, or suggest games that we would like to see on GNU Linux? And, and he goes on about AAA development, and then a second question at the end. But for that first question, that is solely how I get work. I like it when someone who has games, like has a game that they want to port to Linux but don't have the resources, by all means recommend me. I'm totally okay with this, because sometimes once my current queue is burned up And sometimes it's like, well, what do I do next? Is there any game that I would like ported? And then I gotta ask them, or sometimes they'll say no, and then I get caught in that limbo for a while. Whereas when I get recommendations, they can contact me and then I can jump right to it. And I already know that they're interested in Linux support, so we can just get that settled immediately. Like that was the case with Proteus and Super Hexagon. It was they mentioned Linux support. They got pointed to me eventually, and then I just said, okay, I'll do it. And then we got it settled in like a couple days instead of, hanging around having to talk about, what should we do, how much is going to cost, etc. It's mostly, you're interested, I can give you a good rate. Let's just do that. So, I mean, suggest games, ask developers if they need someone, and, if you think it's one that I could do, by all means recommend me. And
guys,
as for the AAA thing, wait, what?
I was just going to say, when you're talking to developers, guys, everyone listening to this, do it politely and constructively. Don't say your stupid game doesn't have Linux support. You fail.
Yes, that's a very good suggestion to make.
So, what were you saying? I didn't mean to interject. Yeah.
It's fine. But with then the AAA titles, and then I don't know if it's a good question. I don't know. It would depend on what the AAA title is, because there are some games that I'm sure that it would take me like a year to develop solely. Because I mean, Ryan, I think had all this prerequisite support for doing like the UT series. He was basically the sole developer constantly, so he just knew those engines. And for the Dungeon Defenders, a UE3 game, he had all that experience with UE3 before, and his old UT3 port that he was able to kind of look at to get Dungeon Defenders done. So I think if it were a AAA title that I could feasibly port, I suppose I would. But there are a lot of AAA titles that are just lost. Not maybe not lost causes, but there are some that probably need more than just some guy hanging out in his office porting games.
That's cool, man. No, I mean, that's a really fair question. That was a pretty good answer, man. I mean, I like that. And yeah, that's going to be an interesting experience when we see a lot of indie developers, if they get pulled in and have to work in teams. That'll be a fun little experience for everyone. So any more here do we see? We have a couple. We've actually answered a few of these just by rambling.
Do you think Linux is unnecessarily hard to port to? Is that straight up just a quote from John Blow's post on Linux or whatever? And the point is, I think when it comes to unnecessarily hard to port to or hard to develop on, I think GDB isn't great, but for me it's okay because I'm not really used to visual debuggers like everybody else is. When it comes to debugging, I've always just been used to, like for when I was doing Java development way back in the day, when I got an exception thrown, it was pretty easy to just debug based on that. But like when I started doing like C++ stuff, I just used GDB, and I was okay with that. I think it's hard for me to say from the perspective of someone who is used to visual debuggers or is used to certain things about Windows development moving to Linux, because I have a very poor perspective actually of the transition. I'm very good at, like, for my developers, when I support their game, I give them my environment to where if they just want to build it themselves and maintain it themselves, they just get Fedora or Ubuntu. I haven't tested on Ubuntu since I developed on Fedora. And they can just go to the directory, and they should be able to just type make, and it should work. So basically my process is generally don't make it to where they need to learn a thing. You give them a text file that says, how to build and how to debug and how to run. And then if it fills more than a page, you need to simplify it. That's how I do it. So I don't worry about me. For me as a porter, my issue is not teaching them to do all of Linux development at once. I teach them to use my environment, and then they can learn from there using what I've done from there, because a lot of that ugly stuff you have to do as a porter, and they don't want to do that. That's why they hired me. They just want to be able to have Linux support, and if they don't want to have to pay me a boatload of money to port their next thing, they can just use my environment and just work from that. It's a lot easier than that whole mess that I do.
That's cool, man. But before we wrap this up, one thing I want to ask, what do you think about some of the negative well, maybe not anti-Linux, but the Braid developer, the guys at Team Meat, don't seem to make so much with the loving when it comes to Linux, and they say some, I take it as very stupid things online sometimes.
Well, here's the thing. Whether or not an opinion, it's one of those things where you have to be able to say, your opinion is wrong. Like, I like to say my opinion is wrong all the time.
Someone's wrong on the internet.
Right. But, like, I think the more important than what they think and whether or not they care about Linux, whether they have a game running on Linux or not, more important than that is that they really don't have to care. They honestly don't, because if you look at Team Meat, he repeatedly was, he's against Linux, and I don't even know if Mugenics is going to have Linux support. But the thing is, they got a port anyway via Humble. They made a lot of money. Okay, there's a Linux version. We still don't have to care, but at least you got it. And Braid, I'm sure he actually would be concerned about Linux support. I mean, I'm sure he's going to get a bundle at some point. But I mean, I'm kind of cynical in that way. Legal disclaimer: I'm not a representative of Humble, but I mean, the problem is not so much they don't care. The problem is, do they have any incentive to care? Because if they're gonna completely dump on this customer base and then just make a port somehow, whether it be contracted or not, and then people just buy it anyway, do they even have to care? Like, really? It's like when THQ, the THQ bundle was Windows only, and yet you would think that it would be more like, everybody would be boycotting it and blah blah blah. As far as I know, most of the Linux users that I know bought it anyway. So did THQ have any incentive to care other than the fact that there were Linux users? They bought it, so what's the point? From their perspective. I mean, obviously, when people buy a game and they expect me to have Linux support out at some point, I'm going to do it because that's how I make my money. But, if someone, if they can dump on or ignore Linux and then make money off of Linux users anyway, there is no incentive to switch that opinion in any way. Or, I mean, it may seem contradictory, but does it matter? Really?
So at the end of the day, we'll probably just get Linux support for everything, whether or not they care about it, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah, is that how it's going?
I try to make sure that my clients give a crap first, because I can't. Because first of all, I need to be able to work with them on the port, especially for post support. And if when we work on as many games as we do, it's kind of nice when we can find a Linux developer that will take over support for the game after you've ported it. Because the best thing that you get is someone who, I'll actually go on record. I can't. It sucks that the example is an NDA project, but I will say that the NDA project I have right now, the developer of that project, not only have they genuinely cared about the port, but while I was porting it, they had a Linux box. And they were testing it with me and fixing bugs with me on the port.
Is that an uncommon thing?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. They'll answer questions about. I mean, generally, it's like, we'll fix things to be cross-platform, or we'll, occasionally they'll run it on, like Terry for Super Hexagon. He ran it on Linux and he attempted to port it, and he was very concerned about making it portable in the first place, but very, very rare, only in certain cases do you see someone that will go as far as having a Linux box and be willing to support the Linux version during or after your port. Sometimes we're kind of relegated to doing it solely. Like, it's basically like for Psychonauts, people have been really, really hammering on that port. But the thing is, Ryan's doing that by himself. Like, I'm sure there may be a point where Double Fine ends up taking that port and maintaining it themselves. But, I mean, one of the hardest things that a porter has to do when they work on so many games is be able to support them all by himself. That's not easy.
That's daunting, man. Yeah. No doubt. Okay. Well, we've taken up too much of your time. I know you're busy, especially with that NDA thing, which is neat. And I'm sure everyone will zoom and enhance on this video and try to read the monitors from your glasses and the reflections.
It just says Reddit open. It's totally boring.
Yes, that's all that's on there. Don't. He's lying. But, no. Where can people find you, man, if they want to scream at you?
They can yell at me either on Twitter at Flibbit or on Google Plus as you can see on the overlay, or on my personal site, flibitijibibo.com. There is a thing in the little main box that says email me, right, and that has my email address on it. It's just flibitijibibo at flibitijibibo.com, which is
Rolls
a
off
great
the
email
tongue,
address for
yes.
protecting against spam.
I can see a spam bot's like, nope. Mm.
Yep. Yeah, it's great.
Okay, I also want to thank everyone over at our favorite Linux subreddit. Well, I don't say ours, I say mine, as in the show's anyway. Linux_gaming. Everyone here in chat room screaming their heads off. We got Tom, the cheesiness, Salamander, and Q. That's cool. But
oh yeah, and I should mention before you reminded me. I'm also on Freenode regularly. It's hashtag or God no, it's
hashtag.
IRC, you can't use hashtag.
Mm-hmm.
It's Steam LUG. You may be able to just link to it in like the notes or something, but
Okay,
it's just Steam LUG, all one word. And then I'm usually in there. I'm an op, so I tend to hang out in there while I'm porting something. You can see me regularly rage about something in there, because if I can't tweet about it, I'll probably be in IRC getting all frustrated, and you can laugh and point and etc.
Sounds fun. Get the popcorn. You can always find this series at linuxgamecast.com or our YouTube channel /LinuxGamecast. Outside of that, I hope you had fun, man. This wasn't too bad of an experience. No trauma.
Oh yeah, it was me.
Later tonight, you won't be silently weeping in a corner, rocking, or anything like that. No, it was fun. I had a genuinely good time. So, and like I said, everyone over at the Reddits, thanks for asking these questions, and we're going to try to do one of these at least every month. We have a couple people lined up, and we'll see you next time on Linux Gamecast.